Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another exciting edition of the Game Changer here live on Spreaker.com. And this is indeed time for a club battle. Screw Attack, we love you. So, I am indeed Nate the Effing Great, being joined here, live here, and in person by the one and only Mr. Max Speedy. How's it going, good sir?
I'm alive. I'm alive. I am here live. My brain's still a little short-circuiting from last night.
The Elimination Chamber was indeed something to behold. That's, I think, the best way to put it.
Oh, yeah.
But we're actually not here to talk about Elimination Chamber. We're back for another club battle, something that we haven't done in almost a while now. I think it's since almost near the end of January, February that we've gotten
something like that.
And we decided to take a little break from a lot of the superhero movies because there's some that are just, freaking awesome. And then there's some where it's just like, oh, wow, I'm ashamed to be a Marvel fan.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of middle ground with superhero movies, they're either, holy crap, this is one of the best things I'll see all year, or, well, I kind of want to fling myself off a bridge.
Yeah, pretty much. So we're going to take a little break from that and actually go into a genre of horror. Yes, now I know we're not quite in that realm yet, but with this movie, it definitely deserves to be talked about no matter what time of the year it is, and that being Stephen King's It. We're going to be doing a club battle to determine who did it better, the one from 1990 or the one from 2017 that recently came out. So let's not waste any time. Let's start off with our point system, and we're going to kick it off with the story. So for the 1990 version, you have to remember that this was actually starting off as a little TV mini-series. So they basically had to do, I think it was maybe like 8, maybe 9 episodes.
I think it might have been less than that, but they had, not only did they have more time, but because it was a mini-series, they didn't need to, they could not only follow the story, they could follow how the story was told in the book. Because in the book, it's not like the more recent movie where first movie, the more recent one, part 1, all the stuff when they're kids, and part 2 is going to be all the stuff when they're adults. The book jumped around. Like, a lot of the stuff that they would go through as kids were almost flashbacks, and they were able to do that in the miniseries. So the story's the same, but the structure is different between the two.
Yeah, I noticed that, and definitely it does show when you look at both of them. Like for the first one, it's roughly about, I think, almost 3.5, maybe almost 4 hours long. I
think it's about 4.
And obviously with the new one that came out, it's only about roughly 2,
like maybe 2 hours 15,
roughly around that. So obviously you hit the nail on the head. With the original, they definitely had a lot more to work with, and they could also kind of cram a lot more. So
yeah,
they definitely show a bit of the adult life, but they also show some of the kids' moments and stuff like that. Definitely a lot to really take in as you're watching this. And if you're watching this all in that 4 hours, it's a lot to just kind of, digest in your head, where you're just trying to figure out, okay, this is who this person is, this is who this person is, okay, this is the motivation, and blah, 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 blah. With the first one in 2017, they actually try to reduce it just a little bit more by just focusing on, as we said, the kids' version.
Yeah.
They focus more on their flashback, on what happened those 27 years ago.
And there's other little tweaks, like the 1990 version, it follows a lot of what the book did. Like, the adult stuff is set in the 1980s, and the kids stuff is set in the 1950s. Whereas in this one, the kids stuff is set in the 1980s, and conceivably the adult stuff would be a lot more modern for when part 2 comes out. So, and that changes a lot of stuff. Like, a lot of people have said, one of the reasons why the kids swear a lot more, and some of the dialogue choices, especially from the mouth, they're able to get away with more because they were in a movie. You're not technically wrong, but they also kids just talk differently in the 1950s versus the 1980s. So, and that affects the story in a lot of different ways. Like, there's certain things that come up when they're kids in the book and in the original version that they couldn't do in the 2017 version because, well, it's 3 decades later. It wouldn't make sense. So, but that's more of just like a flavor thing. But it's still, it definitely changes the vibe of certain scenes.
Yeah, I definitely do agree with that. So I guess we'll just start off with which one we thought was better. For me, I'm definitely going to give it to the newer version because just for the simple fact that less is more. With that, you at least get a chance to digest of what just happened. You get a little more time to kind of really take in everything that just happened. Whereas, in the 1990 version, it just feels like they're kind of throwing everything right off the bat. There's really not that much in suspense, no time to really relax and recover and recuperate. It kind of did feel a little bit rushed, but at the same time, they only had so many,
little episodes to work with.
Right, yeah.
For me, on the one hand, I really do appreciate the fact that the 1990 version followed the structure and style of the novel. But I do have to agree with you, that, I do think the 2017 version was better. It had that tighter focus. A lot of the details didn't need to be spoken. They could just show them like they did in the book. And part of the reason why the book manages to handle the structure of the story better than the miniseries is, the miniseries has 4 hours. The book has almost 1,200 pages. It is one of King's longest books, so he can take his time. He could take his time, go into all these minute little details, and it never felt like it was overloaded or like it was rushed or going too slow. So, honestly, it was a really good decision to just split everything up the way they've done with the new movies. So I I gotta go with the 2017 one having the better story. I personally have some issues with the 1990 version. I still do really appreciate a lot of what it did, and I really, really appreciate that. This is just like it was in the book. If they had like a full TV season, that would have worked a little better. But I gotta give it to the new version.
Yeah, and I think going back to what you said, the details is that at least with the 2017 version, you get at least a chance to appreciate those details. Like they have those references, like this was a movie that was back in the day. This was a style, or this is a fashion statement back in the day. Whereas in the 1990 version, it just felt like, well, we got to get to this next part of the next part of the story. We got to get to this part. We got this part. This part. It felt like everything was just, like we said, really rushed, which I think does kind of kill it just a little bit.
Well, like one perfect example of that, I think, is Mike. In the book, his parents, they were, obviously his parents were, when this happened, it was like the 1940s, and segregation was still a thing, so, there was a all African-American, club pretty much near Derry called the Black Spot. It gets burned down. There's so much detail packed around that event and how it affects Mike's life that they just completely drop it from the 90s version, which I don't blame them. For their time constraints, things got to be cut. In the 2017 version, they go into it, but it's all completely in the visuals, and then there's that one scene where, damn, I'm blanking on names, but the kid who went to the library and he's reading up on Derry's history.
Oh.
We see the newspaper article, and he sees it and he's reading it, so we get all of the information through visual cues because they have more time, because since they're just focusing on the kids aspect of it, they have more time to flesh that out. So, just even little things like that really you would think that, between the two movies, they're probably going to be about 4.5 hours long, about the same length as the miniseries, but when you make a radical structure change like that, you can sometimes get a lot more out of that 4 hours.
Gotcha. Yeah, and it's actually a really interesting transition that you mentioned, Mike, because we're going to be going into the next category, which was the better loser club. And yes, this was exactly it was exactly what they called it. They called it in both movies and loved it.
Oh, yeah.
This was one of the first tough decisions that is very hard to really say that, this one stands out better, this one stands out better.
This one's painful.
Because both of them, both the loser clubs, whether it's the 1990s version or the 2017 version, they have their ups and they also have their downs. Obviously, prime example would be that they didn't do the supposed love triangle like they did with Bill, Ben, and Beverly.
Yeah.
That I understand that was kind of something that they kind of hinted at during the 1990s version, but it didn't really get revealed until years later that Ben was the one that was behind all the poems and all the sweet stuff that was going on with Beverly, whereas in the the new one that came out, they kind of just I don't know. Would you say that they kind of rushed that a little bit, where they just kind of made it like the big reveal? Right in the middle of the movie?
I do think they kind of rushed it a bit. Like just jumping right it. They don't jump right into it. It feels like they're building up to it, being a big deal towards the end of the movie, and then they just kind of jump ahead a few feet and just get right into it. Though for me, one of the downsides with the 2017 movie versus the 1990 version was, I know I just brought him up as an example here, but was actually Mike. Like, in the book, Mike is the guy who went to the library. He's the one who, when they're adults, he becomes the town historian. Just like they made him, like, I think it was a cop in the 1990 version,
yes.
Which it's a little different. But I kind of actually liked that one a little more because it made a bit more sense in a way. Like, okay, he's the town historian in the book. Why would he be privy to, like, police records and stuff? He's just like, making him a cop was, I think, a good decision, and I actually wouldn't mind it if they kept that up in the sequel to the 2017 version next year. But even as kids, even though they cut out a lot of the stuff with the black spot in the 1990 version, it felt like Mike had a lot more to do. Like, he felt like a bit more of an active participant. Whereas in the 2017 version, he shows up, he has the thing with the black spot, and then kind of almost nothing. Like, he could have just, like, there's an entire, like, a 20 minutes where he's just not in the movie even. Mm-hmm. And then they go right into the rock throwing scene, when the racist bullies are coming after him, and they start whipping the rocks at him, and great scene. Mike was cool, and I really enjoyed him in the movie, but he was such a smaller part of everything in the 2017 version. Now, on the flip side, 1990 version, and this is something I guess they both kind of nailed. This is why it's so hard. Both groups of child actors were really good, and the kids from it's bizarre because, like, a lot of the kids from the 2017 version aren't like they're like about 14 to 15. So we're talking about kids that were born like 2002, 2003, but they're able to nail feeling like kids from the early to mid 80s. Whereas in the 1990 version, you have kids who were born like in the late 70s and up through the early 80s, but they nail feeling like kids from the 50s. So I'm just sitting here going, how do I do this?
Right.
It's hard, and I don't want to be the person who's like, I grew up with a whole bunch of stuff from the 80s, and there's a little bit of that bias leaning towards, like, oh my god, I don't like the music, but friggin' the poem kid listens to New Kids on the Block, I recognize that. And I don't want to give it to him just because, like, I don't want to be Captain America, just be like, I get that reference. Right. I don't want to give it to them because of that, but,
Yeah, and let's actually go into some of the other kids that were there, because we talked about Beverly, who definitely, both of them, I think they actually did a really good job of, basically describing every single bit that was
especially how horrible her dad is. Oh man. Although, I will say this, for those of you who've seen both versions but haven't read the book, if you can imagine this, what he does to her is worse in the book. Yeah, that last scene where she, like, hits him, it went a bit further. Don't get me wrong, the book is definitely not intended for children. It is a horror novel, just like what we're both talking about here are horror movies. But there's a little part of me that's like, you know what? Reading that was hard enough. I'm really glad I didn't have to see it.
Right. I think also we have Ben, who would be eventually the love interest for Beverly, who, either way, I feel like I was still rooting for Ben. It's kind of one of those weird things where it's like an early day Team Edward versus Team Jacob. It's either Team Bill versus Team Ben. And I was for Team Ben. Yes, I made that reference. I wish to die. Anyway, so...
Oh, you're going to have me stuttering like Bill here in a minute.
I really just find that Ben definitely was one of those kids. I think that they definitely kind of developed him a little more in the 1990 version, because they definitely talk about how his life, is definitely not exactly, fun and fancy free. He's living with, I think, what's like his aunt and his cousins or something like that. It's like him and his mom, or...
Yeah, something like that. And, there's not a lot of money there. It's just, like, they managed to hit that nail pretty well. Like, his life is not, it's not great.
Yeah. Now, of course, we get into Bill, who is basically the main lead character.
Oh, yeah.
Because of the fact that he lost his brother Georgie to Pennywise. So he is definitely obsessed with finding where Georgie went. Is that he's still alive? Is he still there? I think both of them actually do a pretty good job of this.
Oh yeah, they both do a really good job with that. But like I think the two versions are still a bit different. Like in the 1990 version, like the one scene I always remember from the 90s version when they're kids is when they're out in the forest and Bill, like, he's so emotionally worked up and so angry that he's able to work through his stutter, and he's like, "You killed my brother Georgie, you goddamn bastard." And it's just like, it hits you so damn hard. And it's, for the 90s version, it wasn't so much he needed to accept that his brother was dead, it was that he needed to work through the grief and the guilt. Whereas in the 2017 version, he's working through the grief and the guilt at the end when he finally, breaks down and accepts that Georgie's dead. But even though they're both really different, they're both handled by really good actors. And while it is the whole, God, I don't want to see a kid go through this, they don't play that cheap at all. They let that totally rest on the strength of the performances. And, one is far more angry and the other one is far more sad. And it's just, whichever version you're watching, I personally feel that both versions friggin' nailed Bill.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And then, of course, we got our good old friend, Richie.
The Mouth.
Oh, my gosh. I mean...
Beep, beep, Richie.
Can you just... two great comedy stars in the last... And one that really has definitely grown into his own in the last few years. I mean, Seth Green... I did not even realize that he was a part of this movie, but he still played it very well. Eventually he would be a bit of a comedy star.
Oh, God,
which, of course, everybody knows, Without a Paddle, Robot Chicken, Austin Powers. Yep. And then you also have Finn Wolfhard, I think is his name?
Finn Wolfhard.
Who, honestly, I think he did more dramatic stuff. I mean, especially when you talk about Stranger Things and stuff like that. And then having him go from that to something a bit more of a comedy role where, he's just cussing up and he is just being that guy who's just, always trying to lighten the mood no matter what. It's one of those things, like, either way, I think this is one of those first times where we can say the characters are very well tied. It's very hard to pick between the two of them.
I mean, I will. There is a big part of me that at least with Richie the Mouth, I do lean a little bit more towards the 2017 version, just because, damn, I was not expecting that from him. Like, he's like, in Stranger Things, he's the quiet, he's kind of meek, he's, obsessed with Eleven and all that. He's a much more sensitive kid. You get to the 2017 version and just... all I can think of is, God dang it, kid. If I said half the crap you did when I was your age, I would have got popped in the mouth. But he's so damn funny. Like, when they're at the sewer, you do know that's all of Derry's piss and crap, and he just picks up the stick. Doesn't look like caca to me, senor. Like, oh my God. And that's also one of the cleanest lines he has in the movie. Like, oh God, with him, I do lean a little more towards the 2017 version, but with the rest of them, I can't decide.
And then we of course have Stanley, who was the, I guess, Jewish germaphobe, I think that was.
Well, yeah, the one where his mom was, like, obsessed with, like, keeping him healthy and said, like, you shouldn't go out and do this, and, like, that's what, like, when I mentioned the thing when they're at the sewer pipe, like, and he's the one who brings up, that's like, it's all Derry's waste and stuff, and you don't have any idea how many germs are in there, and a lot of that is because, well, his mom is, like, this super, like, alpha hypochondriac, and she, like, forces that on him, like, he's got his inhaler, even though he doesn't actually need it, he's on all these medications that he doesn't need. He's constantly terrified that he's going to get sick and die, and that's because of his mom. And it's, with him, it's another one I'm kind of torn on, because it was a lot more calm and subtle in the 1990 version, but in the 2017 version, yeah, it's a lot more amped up, but it isn't like played for laughs. Like they always they show you that this is not a good thing,
Right.
and it doesn't feel cheap. So it's
Yeah, and I think also what really did stand out with the Stanley scene was when he actually confronted his mother in the 2017 version, where he's basically, he finds out, everything that she told him was basically a lie, and he's standing up for himself. He's being like his own person. It's one of like the best scenes because so many kids, they do have mothers that are like so overly protective because they really want what they think is best for them. But when you look at, the way that Stanley, presented it in the 2017 version, it's absolutely amazing. And there's like that part of you that reaches in down inside. It's just like, man, I would have loved to have been, that kid Stanley if I would have not gotten, spanked on the bottom or punched in the mouth. In this case, just, be that kid where it's just like, I want to be my own person. I want to be my own man. Everything you're saying is basically, a bunch of his bullshit is basically what he put it down to. And it did turn into one of those little characters. So as far as like my decision on who was better, the 1990 version or the 2017 version, I'm going to give it to the 90s version because of one other thing that we didn't really mention was that in the 1990s version, we do mention that there's a little bit more development with a lot of the characters. But I also I feel like with that more development that they used, it helps them really grow as, actual friends where they can actually start, being friends with each other. They start feeling like a family to each other. When the 2017 version, some of them, they're kind of interacting with each other. They're kind of starting to build. And of course, they had that big blow up in the middle of the movie.
Yeah.
And they all come back just because Beverly was the one that got kidnapped. It was just one of those things where it's like, well, I get that, but I think it would take a little more than just probably one of their friends that they kind of got acquainted with to build up into that. At least with, I think, the 1990 version, I think I remember that they all went down together.
Yeah.
So it was like, they were all united as a front. They were all united to take out Pennywise. Yeah. So I think because of that decision, because I felt like there was a bit of a stronger relationship as well as a stronger bond between them, I'm giving it to the 90s version.
For me, like I said, this is really tough. Like, if it were just like, casual conversation, like, I'm not going to pick, I can't decide. But for this, my back to the wall, I got to go with the 2017 version. There's just, I think one thing that they tried to really do with the 2017 version was kind of tie the group's character development in with the plot itself, and not just with the plot, but like how Pennywise acted. In both versions, I mean, it's obviously less effective in the 1990s version, but in both versions and in the book, he tries to pull a lot of divide and conquer tactics. And I think by having them kind of have the fight and then get kind of separated, they go down at different times, it ties it into that really well, and it makes it seem like Pennywise is a much more present threat. But that's all narrative stuff. In terms of just the kids themselves, yeah, I do think that there are arguably more deficiencies with the 2017 version, like Mike kind of just being there for a lot of the movie. The blow-up seemed a little cliche at times, but overall, I don't know, something about the way they felt, just backed into a corner, I gotta give it to the 2017 version.
Yeah, fair enough.
Now, that being said, I think everyone can agree, and if you've read the book, or at least heard about it, you know what I'm talking about here. They cut out that scene in the sewer where after they beat Pennywise. I think we're all grateful that both versions did that.
Yeah,
that was awkward to read. Even more than the stuff with Beverly, I really didn't need to see. Oh wait, they both centered around Beverly. I super didn't need to see that.
Yeah, I'm going to be saying we'll just call it the scene that will never be mentioned because I mean it involves little kids and it involves something that's a little more
to put it lightly.
I was about to say risque to really say that. I think it's the lightest way that I can actually put it.
Just as like a little side note, even Stephen King has kind of walked back on that scene. Like his original thoughts behind it were, they're all coming into being teenagers, they're all coming into hormones, but at the same time, he wanted it to in the book they use this thing called the Ritual of Chud to defeat him the first time. And then there's these little rituals like when they're standing together in the circle, and then that was supposed to be like another one. He said he realized it was really gratuitous and probably unnecessary, But 2, from just a purely storyline standpoint, it went ritual to get into the sewer, ritual to beat him, ritual to get out. It was just like, it was hammering that button too many times from a story standpoint, regardless of the content and how it was executed. So even the author has gone and said, you know what, I done screwed up on that one. So when even the man himself is saying, I done goofed, yeah, you did, man. And I'm glad both of the adaptations were just like, no, nobody needs that.
I will say that I think that final scene in the 2017 version, which I think is also in the 1990 version,
Where they're splitting off?
where they kind of split off, but beforehand they do that whole deal where they kind of cut their hands and they just do that little bond there. I think that was actually really good. It's one of those things I will agree that both of them did an excellent job of
that was perfect.
Because it definitely shows that, no matter where you are, you're always going to be connected. Is it a little extreme? Well, yes, but at the same time...
They went through something extreme.
Yeah. So it worked out on the end.
I will say this, though.
Yes.
Credit to the 1990 version. For some reason, I will always love, this is battery acid, you slime! I will never not love that scene.
All right. So we go from one extreme to another, and that is the bullies of the It movie, comparing the 1990 and the 2017. This is another one where it was very tough because both group of actors, oh my god, they did literally seem like the most... They basically put the bully phrase to a T, where they're just basically saying like, yeah, we want to hurt you, we want to almost literally kill you because we can.
Well, for crying out loud, just in the 2017 version, they pulled more scenes from the book. I've heard a lot of people asking, is that scene on the bridge where Henry Bowers is cutting into Ben's stomach, is that a thing from the book? Yes, and in the book, he finished the entire name. Yeah, these, Stephen King is known for using bully-type characters, and I love the man, but a lot of times they are very hokey and cliche, even in the books. In both of these versions, they seemed downright monstrous, and it's a situation where the 1990 version's a bit more subtle with it, the 2017 version's a bit more on the nose, the book has a lot more detail to it. These guys in all three versions felt like they could almost be replacing Pennywise as the monster of the story.
Oh yeah, I definitely do agree with that.
They're just unspeakably cruel.
So, I think when we start with the 1990 version, one of the things I definitely hit on the head before we started this was that for them and the way that it started, it definitely seemed like with those bullies, they were more doing these things just because they could.
Yeah.
And especially, after the rock scene, now they're doing it because, they have a reason behind it. It's nobody stood up to us, nobody's done that. It's kind of like a basic story where, basically the hunter wants to feast on the prey, and now that the prey is rallied up with some other forces, now the hunter is just we're going to kill these guys, one by one, and we're going to, just eliminate them entirely.
Yeah.
Just because they can. They're really... That's the scariest part about the 1990s version, is that the fact that it's just we're going to basically kill these kids because we can. It's not we're bored, so let's just kill these kids.
Yeah.
No, it's just one of those things where it's just yeah, we're going to kill you, but because we know that we can, and we know that we can get away with it.
And I definitely got to agree with that, but one thing I will say about the 2017 version is... And this isn't with all the bullies, because honestly, in the 2017 version, a lot of Henry Bowers' sidekicks were kind of just... They were kind of just there. One of them dies in the standpipe, and it's more just treated like a footnote. Oh, holy crap, Pennywise is targeting people other than the main characters. But in the 2017 version, Henry Bowers, both versions of him, oh my god, that kid is a monster. But the one thing I really did kind of appreciate, and the 2017 version didn't ask you to sympathize with this, they just presented it as a potential explanation for why he is the way he is. The 90s version really didn't touch on his dad. The 2017 version gave you about 2 scenes with his father, and Yeah, it makes a lot of sense why 2017 Henry Bowers is the way he is. Just shooting at his son's feet versus firing off his gun. Like, just ripping his personality to shreds right in front of his friends, endangering his friend's life in the gun scene. Like, it really, you looked at it and it's like the movie never asked you to like, oh, poor Henry. No, they just basically presented it as monsters make monsters.
Yeah.
And that was just, for me, that was just like pulling no punches there. Like, I'm not saying the 90s version didn't pull its punches with Henry. It didn't, but something about the way they handled Henry himself was just a gut punch.
Yeah, and I think also with the 2017 version that I talked to you beforehand was the fact that it feels like with it, they had no motivation to start with, but then after the rock scene, then Pennywise gets involved. He's basically like Satan incarnate, where he's basically saying to Henry, he's like, oh, you know you can kill them. You know you can. And it just turns into one of the most creepy scenes, like you said, when he basically kills his dad, and they're basically watching this like kid show. And you just hear, Pennywise and the kids are just really like, kill them all, kill them all, kill them all. But before he gets that, he kills his own father, which does create probably one of the most horrific scenes that I honestly ever seen.
Oh my God, that was...
It's bone chill. I'm getting kind of goosebumps just thinking about it.
Henry Bowers killing his dad. Like, even in the book, most of the detail was more in his head, like how he felt about it, which was unsettling because it was in the book version when it's done from his perspective. It's more his thoughts are very mechanical. They're very kind of impersonal. Like, okay, I'm going to do this because reasons A, B, and C. In the 2017 version, when he does it, you see all of the emotion just etched all over his face. The way the scene is just built up, like you said, they kill them all on TV and all that, and then just the visual effects for it, how he does it, it's weird that it's like I'm a huge horror movie fan, and that's not the most violent thing I've seen in a horror movie, but it was one of the most hard-hitting scenes in that entire movie, and it was essentially a bad guy killing another bad guy, but at the same time, they didn't play it for sympathy. They played it for, this is how much control Pennywise has. This is how little Henry has. This is where that idea of a monster can make a monster comes all the way around full circle, and the younger monster just destroys the other one. Like, it was, like you said, unsettling, goosebumps, just...
Yeah, definitely. So, with that being said, which one are you thinking? Are you thinking 2017 or 1990?
It's, on the one hand, the 90s version does a much better job with Henry Bowers, like his henchmen, his underlings, like, they feel like actual characters, they feel a bit more fleshed out. One of them gets folded in half and sucked through a drain pipe. That, as a child, terrified me beyond words seeing that scene. Like... Right. But on the other hand, the 2017 version pretty much just might as well have had them be friggin' stormtroopers for all the personality they really had. Henry Bowers just... I think I'm actually going to go with the 1990 version just because, while Henry wasn't as completely fleshed out as the 2017 version, he still was a solidified character, but having his underlings, his friends, the other bullies be as fleshed out as they were, it made them feel like a more active presence in the story. So, for me, I gotta go with the 1990 version. Not to knock the 2017 version. I didn't. Obviously, I freaking love the way they handled Henry, but more is more sometimes.
Yeah. I do agree with you on that, and I'll also go with the 1990 version because, again, it does really help when you develop more characters instead of just making it be the main focus. I mean, obviously, unless it's something very, like this character's going to be very powerful, like, we'll use Star Wars as an example. Obviously, the main villain was supposed to be Darth Vader. And yes, he had those henchmen of the Stormtroopers. Some of them had maybe like little quirks or little characteristics, but that they were just not really that important.
Yeah.
In the 2017 version, you kind of felt like there should have been a little bit more importance to the
Exactly.
to the characters that were behind
Yeah.
Henry Bowers, instead of just them being guys that are just like, oh, we're gonna do this, oh, we're gonna do this, and have maybe that one guy who's just like, are we sure about this, Henry? It's like, why do you care? Are you just kind of like being that balance between good and evil or something like that between the two of them?
Well, and I mean, they're way less active in the 2017 version. Like, yeah, they're in the rock throwing scene. Yeah, one of his friends is with him when his dad shows up with the gun. But, like, everything they do, like, Henry's the guy who, first takes charge in the rock scene. He's the first guy who gets hit in that scene. When they attack Ben on the bridge and start cutting his stomach, that's, like, the other guys, yeah, like, two of them are holding Ben back against the guardrail of the bridge, but Henry's the one doing all this. Like, he's doing all the talking. He's the one who came up with the idea for the attack. He's the one who's hitting him with the knife. I mean, it honestly felt at times like you could have. I mean, there's some scenes where, yeah, he needed to have a crew, but throughout a lot of the movie, it felt like you could have just cut them out and just had it be Henry, and it would have been fine. But oh well, like I said, 90s version just felt more fleshed out.
Yeah, I definitely do agree with that. And also, this is kind of one of those weird things to bring up, but this was another one of those scenarios where there was another scene that involved Henry Bowers that thankfully they kind of cut out, where kind of questioned his sexuality, per se.
Yeah, and not that there's anything wrong with that, but the way it's done in the book is a little... Yeah, like... It's another one of those parts, like the after defeating Pennywise scene, that's a little... It's fine you wanted to explore that. Obviously, that's the thing a lot of kids go through. Didn't need that much detail, Mr. King. Really didn't need that much detail with a 15-year-old boy.
Right.
Like, you could have just, like, had that scene trail off. You didn't. You didn't, and I didn't need that.
And for those that are kind of curious why we hear other voices, we're actually doing this at a local Subway. I mean,
restaurant.
Live. We're doing it live in front of our studio here in the Game Changer studio. Yeah. No, we're doing this at a Subway restaurant. So there's going to be some people and music in the background. But
Hashtag not sponsored. Hashtag could be sponsored.
I think I'm going to have to start doing that on Twitter and just tag Subway and other restaurants. Just be like, hey, what do you think? And if the worst they're going to say is probably no, or like,
oh,
or don't mention our product ever again.
Oh, yeah.
But what are they going to do?
We don't want this associated with your wrestling crap.
Hey, we're not just wrestling now. Unlike, when we were back with the Elite Ringside Network, where it seemed like we were purely wrestling based. We try to expand this a little bit.
Oh, yeah, we go from wrestling to apparently horrible demonic entities that hunt and eat children.
Right, exactly.
We have such a range.
And for this week, it'll be the Oscars, which I'll talk about at the end of the show. Next category here, and it's actually really close between the two of the movies right now. I'm very, very surprised by that. Is the visual effects. And I know what people are thinking. That seems like an unfair category because it's 1990s visual effects versus the 2017 effects. Really, it's not, actually.
It's not unfair at all. I mean...
Because both of them are really damn good at how they present it. I mean, first thing right off the bat, a lot of the scare tactic scenes from the 1990 versions was absolutely amazing. I think the one scene where... what was it? Ben is following his quote-unquote father, and basically his father just saying basically saying, play in the sewer, and then there's Pennywise with a bunch of balloons.
Oh yeah.
It's like, oh god, that's so messed up on so many levels, but that is actually really genius, because during the movie he definitely mentions, this is not something that would happen if Dad was around. If Dad was around, they would be treating us like garbage and blah 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 blah. So it is really kind of cool to see the that kind of scare tactic and the psychology that Pennywise does, of just knowing that, hey, this is a weakness for them. I need to exploit it. He does that with Ben. He does that with Richie, because they were watching that horror movie with werewolves and stuff like that. Some people were kind of like, it seems a little cliche, doesn't it? Not exactly. I think it was actually pretty thought out, because it was Richie's legitimate, scared deal. Was he didn't like the werewolf thing.
Plus the effect in the shower, the boys' locker room shower, where he opens the drain up. Like, everyone's like, oh, it's such obvious stop motion. I'm just like, it looked friggin'... Like, if anything, sometimes a little unrealistic looking effects in horror movies can actually be beneficial because it can throw you off. It can make you feel uncomfortable. It's kind of like the uncanny valley notion where something looks superhuman except for like the eyes, and the eyes look super fake. And it can be really creepy and unsettling. Sometimes something that looks unrealistic like that makes it more creepy and unsettling. And for me, that scene was a good example of that. Yeah, it's slightly obvious stop motion. If anything, for me, that just looked like, oh, so he can just bend reality over his knee. Got it. I'm going to go hide in the corner now.
And one of the things that also is really ingenious when it comes to Pennywise is, and this is for both movies, that he can actually create something that only the children could see, but the adults would be just completely oblivious to it.
The bathroom scene with the blood.
Exactly.
Perfect example. Like, in both versions, Beverly's dad comes into the bathroom after Pennywise basically floods it with blood, which, I mean, she's a 13-year-old girl. I think we all know what that was a metaphor for. But, he, comes in and, he takes her by the chin, and he's got the blood all over his hand, and he's looking around. He's leaving bloody footprints in it all over the floor, and he doesn't seem to notice. He doesn't seem to care. It's like, what are you talking about? The bathroom's fine, honey. What do you mean? There's no mess. Like that, or they didn't do this in the 2017 version. And yeah, I know what a lot of people are going to bring up, that it's the when the balloons pop and there's blood in them.
Oh, yeah.
The actors where they pop in front of their face in the scene of the library, they do kind of flinch slightly, but it was the 1990s. There's only so much you could do to, hit that and not have a person react. But the thing is, all they do is flinch slightly. They're just sitting there going about their bit. The one that always messed with me was, there was this little old lady in that scene, and she's sitting there, reading a magazine, pops in her face, gets all over her glasses, just keeps reading like there's nothing going on. And when they show a profile shot, you see her eyes still moving as though she's reading, and it's just, he's doing this to them when they're adults. What the hell?
It's absolutely insane. And I would also go back to the one of the Beverly ones from 2017, was that they really did a good job with that bathroom scene, because one thing that definitely stood out with that was where she was just caked in blood from head to toe. And you know what, the first thing that I thought to myself, that's a reference to Carrie. It was, and it's really brilliant that they actually kind of snuck that in. Was it intentional? Probably not, but at the same time, for people to actually be like, oh man, that almost looks like, the scene from Carrie where she's covered in pig's blood and blah blah blah. It's like, it's still.
Oh, the 2017 movie is just riddled with references to a bunch of other movies and books and whatnot that Stephen King has done, and they were all really small stuff like that, and it was just perfect. Loved that.
Whereas, the 1990 version, they still got to really create their own stuff. Although I guess I could be honest, I think the blood spewing out from the sink, it could be a reference and an homage to the Nightmare on Elm Street, the first original one.
That's
where
true.
Johnny Depp's character.
I mean, because the novel was being written around the time that movie came out, and Stephen King has freely stated he was a huge fan of the first Nightmare movie. So
some things might have.
I mean, if that's what he was trying to reference in the book, and then obviously later with the movies here, I'm totally fine with that, because it also just makes me think of, Stephen King doesn't do references unless there's a purpose behind it. And then it gets me thinking, oh God, Freddy exists in the Stephen King universe. Oh God, I'm so glad none of this is real. I don't want to die a million different ways and all of them horrible.
Right.
The one thing I do appreciate in the 2017 version, yeah, there's a lot of CG because 2017. There was a ton of practical effects, and I think that's why it's also fair to compare the two, because there's no digital effects in the original version, in the 1990 version. It's all practical stuff. There's just enough practical effects in the 2017 version that they they definitely can stand in comparison of each other, and some of the practical effects in the 2017 version blow my mind a little bit. The scene where they're watching the projector, and then, flips, goes dark, and then there's the giant Pennywise with the fangs. That giant Pennywise with fangs, that's not digital. they made like basically a giant animatronic head thing based on Bill Skarsgård and makeup. So like the bit where it's like its mouth kind of hangs down and its eyes dart around and its smile gets really big. Yeah, that was all practical stuff. Like that took them weeks just to build it, and it's just, damn.
And also to their credit, in the 2017 version, I think this one is one of the scenes I actually prefer over the 1990s version. Is, they make the comment, Pennywise always says, like, we all float. And there's that scene where, Bev just looks up and there's like, the heap Tower of Babel like of trash. And then you see, the kids just floating in the air. That is absolutely scarring when you think about it.
Oh my God, especially just for the characters themselves, like that was a really creative idea, and not only is that scene not in the 1990 version, it's also not in the book. That's a completely original idea that they came up with for the 2017 version, and oh my God, I loved that. Just the idea of him keeping like more, not even necessarily mementos, but it's basically like, okay, this came with this kid, throw it on the pile. And you could tell it kind of was just, for him, a trash heap. And then when you realize all of those are, like, important things that were the objects that were important to these kids, and then they're just floating, suspended in time, almost like he just threw them away when he was done, devouring part of them or getting, just killing them. And it's just, when you see that, it added a level of just evil to Pennywise, and that's totally in the special effects, that's totally in the visuals, and it's just, damn.
It's one of those scenes that definitely does make you look at a movie franchise a lot differently, and yeah, props to them for creating something that was absolutely amazing. And
that was so good, I wish it was in the original book.
Oh my gosh. And then we also have the final fight scene between the kids and Pennywise. Now, obviously, both of them have their flaws, but both of them do have their advantages. I think. Let's start with the 1990 version of it,
okay.
Where, definitely Pennywise does still try to take the fear, like when they're standing in a circle, they're holding hands, and Pennywise just circling around them like a shark, showing them every single one of their fears, just so that he can still feed off the fears. And then they finally have the big battle sequence, and like you said, the battery acid, and the silver bullet deal, just all that stuff that they did for that final kid sequence was actually was actually pretty good. Now we go into the 2017 version. It's a little bit more, I wouldn't say hokey, but it's a little more, I think.
I have way more problems with the 2017's final fight.
The floor is yours, sir.
Okay. One thing I loved about the final fight in the 1990 version, and it was still very different from the book. In the book, I mentioned something earlier called the Ritual of Chud. Pennywise has this opposite number in the Stephen King universe. Like, he is this agent of chaos and destruction. His opposite is this basically more or less like a spirit that's an agent of creation. Like, it's implied that God made the universe, but he sent this thing out to basically, like, you're going to create the planets, the galaxies for me, while I focus on Earth, pretty much. Which I always thought was a really cool concept. Like, oh, he's got, like, this opposite number. When they're standing in a circle, this creature communicates with them and says that if you wish to defeat him, you have to defeat it on its level. And basically I'm not even kidding here, lock mouths with it, and it's like a battle of wills and a battle of, like, it's going to sound strange, it's like a cross between a battle of wills and, like, the riddle battle from The Hobbit, kind of put together, and they overwhelm him through sheer force of will. Obviously, that's not what they did in either version, mostly because a lot of what happens in that book is stuff that works really well when you're imagining it, but if you were to see it on screen, you'd probably start laughing. Like, I literally just described them basically defeating Pennywise by French kissing him. So, yeah, it's like, it works really well in the realm of imagination, not so well in the realm of that looks weird on screen.
Right.
But anyway, they still managed to capture the feel of it by, it wasn't so like, everything they did, like, this is battery acid, you slime, hitting him with a silver bullet. it was all them turning. It wasn't so much taking power away from Pennywise, so much as, turning their power against him. Finally, they realized, okay, he basically fights us with fear, with concepts. They fought back on the same level. And they also kind of they really kind of hit home the idea of, the 27-year feeding cycle. Like, it was already getting ready to, go back into its slumber, all that kind of stuff. So it felt like there was a more mythic feel to it. And it didn't damage anything. Like, Pennywise didn't look like, he wasn't, stripped of his monster status, especially there, when he's got, I am the eater of worlds and of children. Like, damn, son. Pinning fucking Ben up against the wall. His last thing where he, turns his hand into that, demon hand and is, trying to drag them down the pipe with him. The 2017 version, seeing them physically beat the crap out of Pennywise really, in my opinion, depowered him a lot. If you can, they basically, in all three versions, those lights, the dead lights, that's his true form. Okay, cool. He's just basically putting on a costume. Okay, if he's so powerful that he's, beyond physical form, why does hitting him with a bat work? It just felt weird, and then where he's, bloodied and cowering, and then he's half afraid, and we beat you, and them feeling that confident. It was just I get it, overcoming your fears, but there's still a story going on here, movie, and what they did was kind of, it really defanged him, in my opinion. If you can just kick his ass with a bat in your fists, how is he supposed to be all that scary? How is he supposed to be this omnipotent threat if all you need is a big stick? Don't get me wrong, it was well handled. I feel really sorry for the stunt guy in that scene, because holy crap, they went to town on him. I'm not going to say it's a terrible scene. It's not, but everything with Pennywise, well, not necessarily everything, but most of what was going on with Pennywise in that movie was going so well. They did a great job of making him seem like this being that was all over Derry and controlled everything, and then Louisville Slugger to the head, down a pipe, done, bye. Okay, 2017 movie, that's one way to do it. Ain't the right way to do it, but it's one way to do it.
Yeah, I can see the issue with that. I think as far as visual effects, so getting back on track with that one, is that I think the visual effects were still pretty good. He still did try to do that deal where, he's basically, showing the fears, and he's showing things that, they're not going to like at all. And, obviously, to your credit, you mentioned, they basically just beat that fear by saying, oh, hey, we just can punch it. We can punch our fears away. I guess you could say that is kind of an issue.
But we're discussing visuals, and from a visual, it really did legitimately look like they were beating the crap out of it. That's the whole goal of special effects, is to get the audience to be tricked into believing what they're seeing is real, to suspend their disbelief. And, well, it really did look like they were bashing him upside the head with a baseball bat, so I can't complain about the visuals, at least.
It's all right, so the final thoughts on that, and our decision.
It's tough.
Oh God, it is tough, because
the old effects have this kind of creepy, a creepy charm to them. But then the new stuff has got, they're polished, but not polished to the point where they look fake. There's still a grungy grittiness to it. It's just, it really, honestly, I think they both look fantastic, and it just comes down to taste.
Right.
So, what's your personal taste preference here?
I think personal taste preference, I should say, because they do make a lot of references, especially in the newer one.
Oh yeah.
But I think if I discredited everything else that took place and just focused more on the kids scene, I think I would probably go with the 1990s version, because obviously, when they have the final battle as the adults, it's a little more It's bad. It's one of those things where I'm just like, wow, this is really
there's a lot of the practical stuff is really good in that movie, but when you start getting into like the giant monster stuff, like 1990 for a TV show, they still had a budget to worry about, and when the giant spider comes out, you saw where they ran up against their budget. Like when it's got like its little claw hands and they don't like move properly. Right. I was just like, oh look, they gave it little T-Rex arms.
Yeah, I think as much as I did love the new effects that came into 2017, oh man, I'm also reminded of that scene where Mike had, where he looked down the dark room, and there's basically, Pennywise eating that sheep.
Oh God!
You know what? I'm changing my vote. I'm going to the 2017 version because I think that they did a better job of, representing the fear as well as just making everything just so creepy to everybody else in there. It's one of those things where it probably doesn't give you like a bit of a jump scare, but it's kind of one of those things where it just scares you in your mind, where it's this is really just something that where they give you that disbelief of could it happen? No, there's no way it can happen. Could it? Maybe.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement there. I got to give it to the 2017 version, which is not to knock the 1990 version. Like I said, there's this creepy charm to those old special effects, except for the giant spider. But they're just able to do a bit more. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's a couple of scenes where it's like, that's CGI, guys. You ain't fooling me. But then you've got other scenes like that bit where Pennywise is just standing there near the back of the house, face covered in blood, and he just waves the severed arm of Georgie, and it just like if you like I've heard of people like reviewing the movie, and they look close, like you can see like blood and veins like kind of popping and dripping out of where the arm gets torn off, and it's just that is so. But the effect is so damn good. Or, like I said before, the giant Pennywise head. Which, I mean, again, not to knock the 1990 version. Like, the 1990 version, I still say one of the best effects in that movie is where he reaches up through the photo. And when they cut out to show it, they're holding the photo, and his arm just comes out. There's, like, nothing behind it. It's just, okay, this is happening. Things are happening. Oh, God. Like... It's two different styles, but yeah, I'm gotta give the edge to the 2017 version.
All right, and you kind of went right into the final category, which is who was the best Pennywise?
Why are you doing this to me?
Tim
Why you gotta be
Curry
like this?
Versus Bill Skarsgård.
Why you gotta be like this? It's killing me with this.
This is the toughest one of them all because both of them have their bad. Let's look at the pros for both of them, starting with the Tim Curry performance.
Okay.
He definitely looked like a real clown, so he definitely seemed kind of harmless at first. But he
had that jovial kind of personality to kind of draw the kids in, which was his whole goal.
Yep. And he definitely seemed demonic at times, where he basically, you could tell, like, let's take the gaping hole scene, for instance, where he just pops out of there. He just has a big old smile on his face. He just waving at Stanley, just be like, "Hi, buddy, how you doing?"
And then when he that like hissing roar that he does in the 90s version, oh God, it used to just get to me.
It really is one of those things where this is one of those situations where you definitely do see Tim Curry in a different limelight because you're so used to seeing him doing comedies and putting on memorable performances, just being absolutely funny, and then you see him in this line and it's like, I will never look at Tim Curry the same way again until you watch Home Alone 2 and it's like, oh yeah, he was the best thing in that performance. I remember that now.
I love you.
Oh God, now I'm just imagining.
Have a lovely day.
I would have loved if he would have just done that as Pennywise and be like, I love you, Georgie. Oh my God, he just definitely created a memorable character as Pennywise. Now, if we look at the cons when it comes to Tim Curry's ones, one that you hit was I
get, like, he's a clown, he's got to draw the kids in, but he was, like, way too funny. Like, I mentioned before the scene at the library with the balloons. That part is really great, especially, Richie is just like freaking out. He's like, Pennywise is making all this noise, and of course nobody else can hear it, but he starts shouting, and the librarian is just like, "Sir, this is a library, and I'm right here. You don't need to shout." And she's just no-selling everything with Pennywise because she can't see him. The downside with that is what Pennywise is doing. All he's doing is sitting there rocking back and forth on a railing, spinning a noisemaker, and telling Prince Albert and a can jokes. Like, your brain gets divided. Like, on the one hand, he's like this demonic entity from like the edge of the universe who eats kids. But on the other hand, I can't take a "is your refrigerator running" joke seriously or find it frightening. Don't get me wrong, and like even some lines that are meant to be scary, like the scene where he opens up the drain in the shower room, and he's like, "We all float down here. Bring your friends." It's like the way he said it was like how a used car salesman would say it, and I'm just like, I get what you're going for, but then there are scenes where he nails it being creepy, like when driving into town and you see him digging the 7 graves, but one of them is already filled in because Stan, killed himself. Like that scene, and he just turns around with the shovel, and all he does is wave. It is so unsettling. But then, like I said, like right after that's the library scene, and it's like a tightrope walk that I don't feel he always nailed.
Right. All right. So then we get into the Bill Skarsgård scene. Positives for him. Definitely one of those guys that just seems like he can just appear out of nowhere, where it's like you can at least expect it. I think one of them was the scene with Bev where finally confronts her father and she's about ready to go. Here's Pennywise. The scene with the projector where they had no control over it, and you just show it. They're just showing the
hair flowing.
Yeah.
And one thing I'll give him. Don't get me wrong, I love Tim Curry, but Tim Curry is one of those actors that regardless of who he's playing, you still see a bit of Tim Curry in the performance. Bill Skarsgård straight up became Pennywise for that movie. Like, holy crap. Like, there was not, like, I don't know if it was the makeup or the voice or just the lines he had, the direction he was given, or if it was just the performance, but there is nothing of Bill Skarsgård on screen. That is just it. And it is just...
Another point, the psychological factor. I mean, you could definitely say that about the Tim Curry version too, like I mentioned before with Ben, but that final scene where, it seems like, Bill and Georgie, they're having like this major heart-to-heart deal. It's like your heartstrings are just kind of getting tugged there, but at the same time, you think in the back of your head, that's Pennywise, don't fall for it. Just, the emotion that was going through Georgie and just everything that going into it, and even Bill showing that emotion. Literally, I'm just like, damn, the scene is so good, but at the same time, that's not Georgie. That's not Georgie.
Stop.
Just him doing that is just so well done.
Yeah, and one thing I really appreciated, don't get me wrong, Tim Curry absolutely nailed the whole, he's just screwing with these kids because whatever he does to them, the fear makes it even better. That was fantastic. And the Bill Skarsgård version definitely had that. There was also just a part of it where you got the feeling this thing was terrorizing these kids because it liked making them scared. Like, there were scenes where it's just like where it felt like, is he trying to prep to eat them, or is he just trying to give them all heart attacks? Like, it's just like he seems to just enjoy torturing these kids for the sake of torturing them. And that, when you consider how powerful he's supposed to be, that is just...
And I guess another positive thing, manipulation. How he manipulated Henry.
Yep.
I mean, it definitely shows in the 1990 version later on with
him as an adult and like appearing on the moon and then underneath his bed and stuff.
But we're seeing Pennywise being influenced to Henry Bauer early on, which definitely is scary because kids, they're impressionable things.
Oh, God.
They really don't know half the time what is right and wrong. But here's this kid who basically knows he's doing wrong, and basically here's Pennywise just saying like, I can help you relive these dreams. here you go. I'm going to give you your knife back. Here you go. I'm going to give you basically these kids on a platter.
And this has less to do with Bill Skarsgård himself or the performance, but one little touch I really liked in the 2017 version, like in the 1990 version, the balloons were pretty much there because he's a clown. Clowns usually give kids balloons. In the 2017 version, it was like his calling card. Like, they were tied to the flag on the mailbox. A lot of times you would just see a balloon, like the balloon floating through the library. It's like, that's like either he's around, he just left, or maybe he's right behind you and he's just moving with you so you don't see him. Like, that was a really good choice on behalf of the filmmakers. That was...
So basically the balloon served more purpose in the 2017 version than he did for the...
But that's getting more like into story stuff. Right. But it is something connected to Pennywise that I appreciate.
Oh, definitely.
But
now we go into the negatives. Bill Skarsgård. One that definitely stands out was the scene when they were in the sewer and he just pops out of the little carnival thing. He just does this little dance thing.
I really think they hinged their bets way too much on Pennywise, the dancing clown. It's like, I mean, don't get me wrong, it was kind of unsettling at first, but as that scene, it's like, oh, the music's ramping up, it's getting more in flames, and it's getting creepier. No, this is getting funnier, man. This is getting a lot funnier by the second. Like, by the end, like, if they hadn't done the thing where he, after that, like, opens his face up and you see the dead lights and he takes Bev. If they hadn't done that, like, almost immediately afterwards, I think I would have just started busting out laughing.
Right.
But for me, though, the biggest flaw with this Pennywise, and it's a big one in my opinion, his appearance and his demeanor. Like, Tim Curry, when he wasn't think of the scene at the beginning of the movie where he's in the storm drain. Oh, come on, Georgie. Don't you want to... But, like, he seems almost... Like, when Georgie's like, I have to go, he almost seemed legitimately sad there. Like, aw, but do you have to? Come on, we can hang out more, can't we? All right. Don't you want your balloon before you go? Whereas... And then, of course, his appearance. Like, he looked like a happy, jovial clown. Bill Skarsgård looks like something that walked out of your damn nightmares. Why would a child go near that? Yeah. And the way he spoke, it's just... I get it. He's evil, but he's not supposed to be an evil clown necessarily. I think they got way too focused on that and forgot that that's basically just a costume for it. And it's like, if you're being creepy and weird and unsettling to the kids right away, how are you going to lure them in? Like some of the stuff, like lifting the balloons and smiling or waving Georgie's arms, stuff like that made sense. At that point, he's just trying to terrorize them. But for the initial luring the kids in, like, all I could think of was, okay, you guys spent way too much time following that creepy clown news story, didn't you guys?
Right.
And that's not necessarily a knock on Bill Skarsgård. He probably would have given a very different performance if they had given him different direction. And I'm not trying to say he does a bad job, but it brings too much into question.
He kind of was like the one clown in clown class that was just really not all quite there.
Yeah.
It was almost like this one guy who was in what's the best way of putting it? I guess you could say like in rehab or something like that, and he didn't quite fully finish up, so he still had a little bit of that craziness to him.
I think,
and like I said, the stone grain scene where he basically is just basically talking to Georgie. It's one of those things where it's like, unless his voice is somehow mesmerizing,
like he's hypnotizing him or something,
right? It doesn't really draw in that feeling of, hey, come play with me, Georgie. It draws me as a parent, like a future parent, being like, I'm going to keep my kids away because
even there.
Even though content storm drain, that's kind of
that's just kind of weird. But I don't know, like in the 1990 version, Georgie's reactions to Pennywise felt much more understandable because he's such a young kid. And this guy is going out of his way to just be friendly and like, hey, man, don't you want your boat? Don't you want a balloon? We got popcorn and candy and rides. It's freaking awesome, man. Whereas in the in 2017 version, I don't know. I guess the best way to describe it is one of the things that King had in mind where... this wasn't like how Pennywise was supposed to be in the book or anything, but it was like what kind of part of his inspiration was, is he'd read a news story about, an actual child killer. And this guy, to lure in all of his victims, he was really friendly, he was outgoing, he would offer them toys and stuff. Like, that sounds a little cliche, but with young enough kids, that's going to work. All I could think of is Georgie's reactions in the 1990 version, because of his age, because of how Pennywise is, presenting himself, made a lot of sense. In the 2017 version, I was honestly shocked he didn't look at Pennywise and go, my brother can make me another wax boat, bye, peace, and left. Like, it felt weird, and I mean, I know people that, like a friend of mine, she loves Stephen King. She loved it, she loved the original TV miniseries. And while she did really like this movie, she said, I loved all the performances, I loved the kids, I loved the special effects, yada, yada, yada. Pennywise, she was real 50-50 on, and that was almost her whole reason. And I think I enjoyed the 2017 Pennywise a lot more than she did. I definitely got where she was coming from. Like, that coupled with that scene where, like I said, at the end, they're kind of just beating him down and it depowers him. It just... But then again, that's also the pros versus the cons are where it gets really hard to pick between these two, because they both have flaws that really hurt the character, but everything they do right is done like borderline perfect. The performances are perfect for what they're going for and are just really good performances anyway. Their movements, God, just the way the two guys walked in, like... And one thing, you and I were discussing Nostalgia Critic earlier, and one of the things that he said about the live-action Jim Carrey Grinch was that Jim Carrey was never restrained by that costume. He moved with it. He made it part of his performance. Tim Curry and Bill Skarsgård both did that. Like, they inhabited this character. Like, there is no knock you can give to performance. Almost all of the issues with the characters come from the writers and directors basically going, this is how we're going to do it. And the actor having to play the role within those confines. So this is really tough.
It is really tough. It might be a toss-up. Right now, it's 5-3 in favor of the 2017 version. And I feel like going in with a tie seems too cliche, so I think I'm going to do a safe bet, and I will pick the 2017 version. Yes, it has its flaws. Yes, there are some things that really kind of make you kind of scratch your head, but for the most part, Bill Skarsgård did his job. He was presented as a scary clown. He definitely represented, I think the Stephen King adaptation from the book pretty damn well.
Oh, God.
And I think there's more positives going from the Bill Skarsgård version than from the Tim Curry version, where, like you said, Tim Curry, he's that fun-loving clown that, seems so harmless but can actually kill you. And I think that with Bill Skarsgård, he is kind of presented in a way that, yes, he can kill you, but there's still something about him that makes you kind of curious. And that might be what was going on with Georgie's mind, where maybe he's not as judgmental, maybe he's just thinking like...
Well, I mean, little kids are always like so open. Like, I mean, I've seen little kids like be completely kind and openly over-understanding with like strangers, where even like when they get to like... But meanwhile, you get someone's like age 12 and 13 and, it's like they start to edge away. But someone like, Georgie's age, like they're a blank canvas. They're completely innocent.
Yeah, I think that's the way of putting it. So I'm going to put my vote into the 2017 version.
For me, like I said, this is really tough. This was really tough, and I was kind of thinking, and even up to this point, I had not made my decision. Because, we discussed the categories earlier, and I still hadn't made my decision up until right now. And I was thinking about it while you were giving your reasons. I am also going to go with the 2017 version, but for me, I'm putting aside writing, direction, the actual performances. It's going to sound weird, but the one final thing that I think nails it is the overall look. no offense, I get it's like a budget issue, but Pennywise's costume looked like they went to Halloween Express. And there's also the way he looked didn't feel right for like in the scenes when they're in the 50s. Like you look at that costume and you look at like images from like say circuses or like clown performers and whatnot from around the same time or even later into the 80s and stuff, and it just felt almost a little too modern looking, and it looked too clean and whatnot. Like there could have been like little frayed edges, like okay, Pennywise isn't perfect at this, like because he's so focused on getting the kid. The 2017 version, not only that costume just looked like something out of the 1800s, and it had those little frayed edges and whatnot, and I will say this, I guess this kind of does get into the performance. The way Pennywise talked in the 2017 version, it felt like a creature that wasn't like it didn't completely understand how to talk. Like it didn't understand English fully, didn't understand human speech fully. And for that little bit coupled with the costume just gave it this real uneasy feeling. Whereas, and I get that some people will argue, oh, well, that's completely missing the point. Pennywise, like in the book, they say he crashed on the earth like millions of years ago. He hibernated until humans showed up, blah, blah, blah. And so he's had time to refine and perfect all this. And like, I get that. And that's creepy in its own way. But when there's something that is just so alien that it just doesn't quite look right, it doesn't quite sound right, that's what kind of pushes it just over the edge. And I mean, it is just over the edge. Like, if we were giving this thing like a number grade, it'd be like, the Bill Skarsgård version gets a 9.0. Oh, what did the Tim Curry version get? 8.9. Like, it is close. Like, it is just edging out. Like, flaws aside, because the flaws don't completely ruin anything here. Flaws aside, both performances are fantastic. Both characters or interpretations of the character are fantastic. But 2017 just has that little tiny edge. So,
all right. Well, that being said, with a score of 7-3, your winner is the Stephen King It adaptation in 2017.
And we still have a second half of it to go.
We still do. So, final thoughts as well as critiques about both of these movies. Definitely, we're not trying to knock either one of them down.
God, no.
This is just completely subjective. It's completely our opinion that we feel the 2017 version was a bit better. And in all honesty, they both provided something very good, whether it's nostalgia, whether it's entertainment, whether it's that natural fear of what clowns are. It's just one of those movies that definitely really hits home, because it definitely does, focus on the fears that everybody has, whether it is, werewolves, whether it is the unknown.
Yeah.
Everything that goes into both these movies, Bill Skarsgård and Tim Curry definitely do a tremendous job of really, bringing that out. And it's just
we really got lucky with this. Like, we have one of the best horror novelists in American history gives us one of his best books. We get 2 adaptations of it. Technically, you could argue 3, since they split the 2017 one into 2 movies. But I'm going to lump the 2 parts together.
Right.
We basically get 2 of them, and so far, both of them are great, but they, in addition to adapting the story, have their own identity. I mean, think of all the stuff that's all the books and comics and whatnot that have been brought to the screen or the TV where they just botched it. I mean, think of Fantastic Four. Roger Corman tried Fantastic Four in the 1980s, and it was so bad the studio didn't even release it. We got the Fantastic Four movies in the early 2000s, and then we got that horrible one in 2016. We had 4 chances with that, and they all were just terrible. With this, they took a 1,200-page novel, turned it into a TV miniseries and a 2-part movie, and nailed it both times. And it's also one of those times where it's like, oh, but they already did this, but the new one feels so different that it feels like it's its own thing, and it's just, there's 3 versions of the story, and all of them are good. They got talent behind all this stuff. Thank you, Hollywood. Thank you, TV. Thank you, Stephen King. Thank you for making me crap myself in horror 3 times over.
I think it is one of those things where you win some, you lose some, but it is always good that when they do these remakes, that not only do they have some of that originality, they also add some unique twists to it.
Yeah.
Or even something that goes further than that. They have like the originality from, like, you know, the movie that was beforehand. Like, I'll use Beauty and the Beast as a prime example. Is that they took, you know, stuff that was from the original back in like the 1990s, but they also incorporated some other things that were incorporated from a lot of earlier adaptations. One thing that stood out to me was the deal where Beauty's father takes the rose, and that's the reason why Beast had him as hostage. It wasn't one of those things where it's like, oh, you're trespassing, therefore you go in cage. It's like, no, you stole from me. You're going to rot in here for the rest of your life.
Or one thing I really liked was in the new version of Beauty and the Beast, Gaston and LeFou, like, they fleshed out their friendship a lot more, and then they also, like, you saw a lot more of the subservient, like, LeFou is basically his little slave boy. He's pretty much, Gaston is definitely he's the boss man. But there was, like, they also expanded on stuff. Like, LeFou was supposed to be a funny character, and I love that bit in last year's version of it, where they're doing the "No one sings like us," that whole song, and he's like, there's only one guy in town who's got it all down, and his name is spelled G-A-S-T. I think there's another T. I just realized I'm illiterate and I've never had to spell it out before. That had me rolling. Like, there was a lot of funny bits in the movie. That was, for me, the absolute linchpin of that movie's comedy. Like, that was gold. I feel like Beauty and the Beast last year and Stephen King's It last year, they're not just, like, because Beauty and the Beast was, a French story from, I want to say the 1870s. So they're both kind of fall into the same category if they're an adaptation, but they're also a remake. And not only do they both kind of nail the adaptation part, they nail the remake part. They feel different yet familiar. They have their own identity, but there's just enough nostalgia to get you to think of it, but you can still separate the two and judge them on their own merits. Like, I sometimes I do kind of prefer, and I prefer that to, like, the remakes where it's pretty much either we're going to rip everything that was in the original version out and make it as different as possible to the point where we clearly only picked the name for brand recognition,
right,
or it's just the same movie all over again, just not as good. RoboCop. I mean, this is how an adaptation is done. This is how a remake is done. You make the audience recognize the thing that they already know, but you have it be its own entity. And I mean, that alone is, I will admit, I do prefer the 2017 version of it, but I feel like that movie and Beauty and the Beast should kind of be a signal to Hollywood. Like, if you absolutely have to do all these remakes every year, this is how you do it. You keep the spirit of the original while making something different. And when you also realize that this movie had to balance not only that, but being an adaptation of a very well-renowned book, like, this thing sold over 100 million copies around the world. People know this story inside and out, front to back. It struck, I mean, I may have issues with the balance of Pennywise's character, but they knocked that out of the park.
Yeah, I got nothing else to say other than that, because you basically hit the nail right on the head. So
I am good at this. I am good at the talking.
Yes. So with that being said, we're going to conclude this episode of Club Battle. Of course, this week being the Oscar week, so I'll be doing some actual interesting deals in which we'll talk about a little bit about the Oscars. I'm actually going to look at some of the interesting categories as well as nominees and winners from the last couple of years and give my thoughts on them.
Isn't this the 90th Oscars now?
The 90th Oscars this Sunday.
Wow. I mean, in 10 years, we'll see 100 years of Oscars. Like, damn, like, the Oscars are older than my grandparents even. This is weird.
And in 10 years, we're still going to be two crazy guys just doing this, which, in all honesty, I'm okay with.
As long as you people keep listening, we'll keep rambling.
There we go. All right, so you can always follow Mr. Max Beatty on his Twitter at Agent Cooper 1989. You can follow me on Twitter at Real Effing Game, and give us a like on our Facebook fan page, facebook.com/changing up the game. So for next week, oh boy, I got the perfect one that we're going to be talking about, and you are going to resent me for this. Let's just say It's about a nightmare, and it happened on Elm Street.
Oh my God, fuck you. No. Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, but no. We already know which one's killing me. You're killing me, Smalls.
And we're going to end it on that note. So I'm Nate the Effing Green here with Max Speedy for the Game Changer. We will talk to you guys for the next club battle. Woo! Bye-bye.